Greetings, everyone. Well, for today's video, it's actually a little bit more timely than I anticipated, being the beginning of July, Independence Day coming up. Um, it's thoughts that I've had before, and I guess it sort of comes around again, being after the video I made regarding resetting the Star Wars universe, erasing the sequel trilogy. And so these are thoughts that I've had before, specifically regarding freedom of speech. So this one's going to be a little bit. I'm not a constitutional expert, understand, but these are really more observations regarding consequences or expectations regarding our right to free speech and sort of our interpersonal relationship with each other. So let's just review what the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States says. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or a law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, a law against the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So essentially, this First Amendment seems to be the primary driving force in the founding of American society and thought. Freedom is the essence of the American experience, a tenet of life buried previously by tyrannical governments of the past and of the present. So the following thoughts are specifically relating to abridging the freedom of speech. And all of these thoughts start the same way. And here's the thought. According to the First Amendment, you have the constitutional right to, get ready for this, to say, write, muse, argue, enshrine, output, compose, posit, post, publish, preach, produce, proclaim, prophesy, present, or otherwise express yourself however you choose. But, okay, how did you like my alliteration towards the end of that one there? So, cutting it down here, according to the First Amendment, you have the right to say whatever you want to. But, and these are only in a rough semblance of order, but you are not guaranteed an audience. YouTubers like myself are quite conscious of this fact, despite wishing otherwise. Now, teenagers and children particularly struggle with this concept. They say, my life is a stage and the world is watching me. Now, some people may have a self-absorbed notion that they deserve to be heard. Kind of like a woke celebrity who thinks that people value their opinions just because they pretend to be like them or better than them, depending on the role that they portray. I only have one attention span, so because I'm not Superman, so I'm certainly not God in heaven. By nature, I can only absorb so much input, and I can only watch one channel at a time or listen to one radio station at a time, etc. There's so many voices to be heard on the internet, and they all vie to varying degrees to be heard, ranging from the professional to the hobbyist. I have some videos which have surprised me as to how many views they have, and some videos have next to none. I express myself in different ways through these different videos, and I'm glad if you like it, but I don't expect to be heard just because I'm here. So it requires a little degree of humility. So you can say what you want to, but you're not guaranteed an audience. Another point is you can say what you want to, but I can make my own choice of who to listen to. So it means I can choose to listen to you, or I can choose to ignore you. I make choices of what input I accept. I have certain tastes. I like 40s swing or big band music or Barry Manilow, John Williams film scores, or Sonic the Hedgehog video game soundtracks. I really enjoyed Ryan Daly's videos where he took different scenes from the Sonic the Hedgehog movie and put like the soundtrack from the video games in there. I really enjoyed those. I thought those were fun. Now, some things I don't like are hip hop or rap or, most any modern music, really, modern pop music. I watch sci-fi, fantasy, or adventure films, but I detest Hallmark Christmas movies. I mean, really, they are less original than Power Rangers shows, and I like Power Rangers. Likewise, there have been TV shows like Criminal Minds or Designated Survivor, which I watched for a few seasons, but then I took the viewer discretion advised seriously, as they either became too graphic or too gratuitously vulgar and licentious, respectively. I choose which YouTubers I subscribe to and watch, just as you have chosen to watch me. And by the way, if you subscribe, that'd be awesome. Just the same, I can choose which voices to listen to regarding current events or religious matters. Do you remember Geordie LaForge from Next Generation, Star Trek Next Generation? We got to see a representation of sight through his visor in one episode, and it's being displayed on the main viewer of the bridge. And Captain Picard asked how he could make any sense of it with all of the input and stimulation. LaForge compared it to listening to a certain voice in a noisy room. You learn to filter it out from all the noise. And in this way, I think that while the internet has granted people more ability than ever to let their voice be heard, I think that there are voices which simply just make noise. They don't beneficially contribute to the whole. And so I choose not to listen to them, and that's my choice. Now, but in choosing who not to listen to, this is going on to the extreme other way. In choosing who not to listen to, I think there's a detriment to sequestering oneself in safe spaces, as has been the case on liberal college campuses. This is an extreme, illogical, and hypersensitive reaction. Safe spaces are really rather ridiculous, I think, because there's a difference between refusing negativity or unwholesome content and being immature and simply incapable of hearing thoughts that aren't part of your own echo chamber. Young adults should be able to grasp difficult truths or honestly wrestle with them without shriveling into fetal positions and playing with crayons and Play-Doh. My opinion, shared by many it seems, is that the parents of millennials have failed to equip them for adult life. But this refusal to listen does lead into my next point. So I said that you can say what you want to, but basically I don't have to listen to you. I can choose to listen or not. This next one is you can say whatever you want to, but I don't have to agree with you. Now, it feels similar to the last point, I know, so maybe you just think I'm splitting hairs, but let me draw the distinction here. Choosing your input is a matter of allowing or refusing it in the first place. This new point comes after you have chosen to receive it, and now you must decide what to do with it. You evaluate it. You mull it over. Now, for an example, you may staunchly proclaim that pineapple, black olives, and anchovies are the greatest combination of pizza toppings in the world. I would staunchly disagree, as my body recovers from the shock at the thought or the smell of such a monstrosity. I would counter that classic pepperoni and sausage is the best. Although I do like a good chicken, bacon, and ranch pizza. Those are good. The oddest pizza that I ever had was called hibachi pizza. Yeah, it was like the best of both worlds. To me, it was. But if your unusual choice of pizza toppings brings satisfaction to your taste buds, then very well. Okay. I, having evaluated it, have having evaluated it, have chosen to not ask for a slice of your pizza. And we can both be happy then. Like I said, we all have different tastes and preferences. But this thought continues into experiences and convictions. These prior examples are more about personal value statements, aided as they may be by experience. For instance, I don't like banana peppers. I've tried them. I think they're gross. Please don't ask me. No. Now, getting a little bit more real world here. Some people think that if you don't agree with them or you vote opposite of them, then you hate them or that you are their enemy. This line of thought is perpetuated by the divisions that we're seeing in our country for the last couple of decades. But now I do recognize that these divisional fires are stoked and fueled by those who wish to bring anarchy to this country. Or, remake it into sort of a communist or Marxist country. But nonetheless, even at face value, believe it or not, we can disagree and still live in peace in our daily lives, whether together or separately. This again, contrary to the culture of this again is contrary to the culture of being offended. Living in peace is opposite of being offended. Because, see, not everything in daily life is adversarial. Some things are more innocent than others. Some differences are more innocent than others. Now, this was the point that I was trying to make in my recent commentary regarding the reported drama at Lucasfilm, centering on Kathleen Kennedy's vision for Star Wars and the resistance that's come against it. I suggested that the sequel trilogy, as it stands, or the sequel trilogy still stands on its own as good stories at face value. I've already gone into all of that, so I'm not going to repeat that though. And what I mean is, it stands good at face value if you ignore the behind the scenes drama of it, just the film as it is, the end result. And I have said that my opinion is that unless you are a writer or a filmmaker, I really don't believe that someone has the authority to criticize intellectual properties that they don't own the rights to. Even though dislike is fully valid. Criticizing it, that's one thing, but simply disliking it, I think that's valid. So that is me disagreeing with disgruntled fans. And disgruntled fans are disagreeing with Kathleen Kennedy. My argument was that subjective value statements are just that. They're subjective. To force those values on others, kind of authoritative, being authoritative like that, or no, authoritarian. That's what it is, authoritarian. So forcing your value subjects on others isn't allowing free speech or free thought or reason. And ultimately, I feel that the sequel Star Wars didn't have to be something to fight over if you just look at the films themselves. But that's that. Now, what's more, life, particularly on social media, which is sculpted, crafted, filtered, and dramatized beyond reality anyway, life on social media is nothing like real life. Okay, maybe that's a little too strong. It's only a portion of real life because it's whatever is published. It's refined and such like that. Now, most people... Okay, here's what I was meaning by social media. It's not like real life. Because in social media, at least what I've seen, there's been just a lot of contention, But most people I know don't go out of their way to persecute each other on the street for their personal beliefs, like an internet troll, I never even saw, when I was a kid, I never even saw a playground argument over whether Sonic or Mario was better. Not like a serious knockout brawl or anything like that. you can insert whatever pop culture reference into that you want to. But on the whole, excusing, criminals and domestic terrorists, people are generally friendly, and they just want to live in peace. We should be able to choose whether to wear a red Trump campaign hat or to keep our Obama bumper stickers on our vehicles and express ourselves peacefully and move on with our lives, so long as, people play fairly and act respectfully. So, you can say what you want to, but I don't have to agree with you, and that's fine. Now, the next one. This is kind of a big one to elaborate on here. You can say what you want to, but you may not be correct. Now, this one, when I did I got my details mixed up about The Mandalorian, which hadn't premiered yet at the time, when I made my video of which order should I watch Star Wars in. I accidentally read that The Mandalorian was going to take place after Revenge of the Sith, ROTS, instead of Return of the Jedi, ROTJ, which is what it actually said. So I misread that, and so I put it in my notes wrong. And so afterward, I had published it, and then I realized my error, and I was kind of embarrassed about that. Being a Star Wars person like I am, to kind of get that wrong. But I mean, it hadn't premiered yet, so I don't know. I'm just hoping that people are forgiving. But I mean, it's not a highly watched video anyway, so I guess my embarrassment really isn't that big. My error isn't that well known. Just make sure you got your facts right, Now, as another example, sorry about that. As another example, somebody may make a website or a channel or a page or, social media page about something completely ridiculous, like my cat has superpowers. They may use all kinds of arguments or persuasions to prove it, and they may actually believe it. But it doesn't make it correct. Without convincing evidence, it's really little more than faith, misplaced as it may be. Cats don't have superpower. They don't, They're nice creatures, but they don't. And yet, freedom of choice permits that it permits them their incorrect and unsubstantiated views. Or consider looking at a full color picture with colored lenses, like rose-colored lenses, or like those green, like shaded ones or something like that you can get at eye doctor. Wearing these different colored lenses, of course, doesn't alter the image itself, not the picture that's hanging on the wall, but rather it distorts your personal perception. It's like those stupid "what color is this shoe or dress" pictures. The exposure is poor, the lighting is poor, and so much is made about what is seen rather than what it really is. And so there's always this argument of, but what color do you see? But it's like, no, it's not what I see. It's what it actually is. And it's not it's like a rigged argument. It's just whatever. I'm not bitter about that at all. But my point is ultimately represented by this possibly controversial and possibly offensive statement. Not all points of view are valid. If I may take a Star Wars side trail here, since this channel often regards Star Wars a lot, Obi-Wan rationalized his interpretation of Anakin's death to a young Luke by saying, "Luke, you will find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view." Now, some might argue this to say that the Jedi are individually cherry-picking what they believe in and calling that truth in order to justify any rogue actions, but that wouldn't fit the character of the Jedi as a whole, and that would imply that there aren't absolutes. I know, absolutes, never mind that line. Such as, it would imply that there aren't absolutes, such as the light side preserves nature while the dark side perverts it. While some Jedi have alternative thoughts, which weren't in strictest accordance with the Jedi Code, like Qui-Gon, the Jedi Council themselves needed to adhere to and promote the code for the sake of unity within the Jedi Order. And I think that Obi-Wan's statement to Luke is better interpreted as its meaning as to say that our collective light side point of view, our collective light side point of view have revealed the truths that we must cling to. In the case of Obi-Wan's description of Anakin's death, he elaborated that Anakin's soul died when Vader came into existence. This certain point of view affected how Obi-Wan viewed Vader, as not an old friend, but as the Sith who murdered his brother, whom he mourned. Vader said on Mustafar, "From my point of view, the Jedi are evil." How skewed his perception was, fed by Palpatine's ego-stroking and his selective, accusatory rhetoric concerning the Jedi Order. Now, Vader would say here that the circle is now complete, meaning that I've come full circle now to this kind of serious point, that not every point of view is valid. Perspectives can be skewed. You ever been in sometimes in like in children's museums or in science stations or imagination places, things like that? Sometimes they have those rooms that are built off center like that, so the floor is like this, and you can get in there and you can see one thing, your perspective sees this thing, but gravity is telling you something else. Totally messes with you, you know? That's an idea how your perspective can be skewed. Now, particularly in our day, it seems that the mainstream media selectively reports or deliberately misreports certain details, which give false impressions or incite undue reactions. Certain political models like communism and Marxism has been fed to millennial college students with misleading information, or just spotty information, and emotional fervor in order to indoctrinate them into attacking authority figures or certain people groups who are allegedly causing all the world's problems, which completely ignores people's personal choice. It's just putting the blame on things other than themselves. And yet, history shows that every country which has tried pure communism, unaided by any capitalism, has invariably failed. It is a bad and impractical point of view. This is why ignorant people are tearing down the world, canceling entertainment, and erasing history. Not only is their argument flawed, but they are used as pawns in an election year. Others, specifically white millennials, are compelled to apologize for things that they haven't even done. Like an inverse of gaslighting, where instead of being told, "Oh, that never happened," they're being told, "Oh no, it's always happened. You've always been evil, and you just have never realized it. Your whole existence is evil." Whenever somebody says that they're woke, I just have to think to myself, what version of the Matrix are you plugged into? What false reality is being pulled over your eyes, At the end of the Star Trek Next Generation episode titled The Drumhead, it sums up this idea so well when a Federation ambassador degenerates into political activism. Picard says, "We think we've come so far. Torture of heretics, burning of witches, and all ancient history. Then Before you can blink an eye, suddenly it threatens to start all over again. And worse is, I believed her. I helped her. I did not see what she was. Mr. Worf, villains who twirl their mustaches are easy to spot. Those who clothe themselves with good deeds are well camouflaged. I think, after yesterday, people will not be so ready to trust her. Maybe. But she, or someone like her, will always be with us, waiting for the right climate in which to flourish, spreading fear in the name of righteousness. Vigilance, Mr. Worf. That is the price we have to continually pay. That's why I think that the COVID has been made into more of a panic than a pandemic. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not saying it's fake, but consider the inconsistencies regarding its storied existence. Racking up the number of deaths by claiming that COVID was the culprit of death when really there were pre-existing conditions, and they just kind of tack it onto there and say, oh no, COVID killed them, when COVID was only just, the straw that broke the camel's back in their death. Why are masks and social distancing not a concern at protests, which can be up to thousands of people in close quarters for more than 30 minutes at a time? But it's a concern enough that churches are closed and forced to close, and small businesses are forced to shut down. Why isn't there so much panic about a regular yearly flu season, and that even has a vaccine? There's flu, but we have a vaccine, and people aren't panicking about that. I sense a double standard here. And I think that elected liberals are using and buying the press in the name of righteousness to shame those who don't continue to jump through their hoops anymore. They can't pass up a good crisis, real or imagined. Now, continue to be safe, but keep your head. Don't panic. So, that was... You can say whatever you want to, but you may not be correct. Now, the next one. You can say whatever you want to, but just because you can say it doesn't mean you should. I think of Jurassic Park, actually. When they're at the table there and they're having their lunch and they're kind of arguing with Hammond about whether or not what he's doing is actually a good thing, what he's creating, what he's expressing is a good thing or not. And Ian Malcolm, played by Jeff Goldblum, says he's just talking about how John Hammond is just kind of piggybacking on everybody else's experience and creating something without doing his due diligence. And John Hammond says, played by Sir Richard Attenborough, he says, I don't think you're giving us our due credit here. See, our scientists have done things which nobody have ever done before. Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied on whether or not they could, they didn't stop and think if they should. So, what I'm talking about is not censorship, understand. It's not censorship. But this idea that just because you can say it doesn't mean you should speaks specifically to being tactful and respectful and using appropriate filters to prevent regrettable occurrences. There are lots of ways this can be applied. I think of Gandalf the White, who advised Pippin about not divulging sensitive information to the disagreeable and troubled steward of Gondor in Return of the King. Now listen carefully. Lord Denethor is Boromir's father. To give him news of his beloved son's death would be most unwise. And do not mention Frodo, or the ring. And say nothing of Aragorn either. In fact, it's just better if you don't speak at all, Peregrine Took. Now, for a real-world instance, you may desire to go get some ice cream, go treat yourself. But saying that in front of children will lead to hungry mouths like baby birds with their beaks wide open, screaming for ice cream. We all scream for ice cream. But spelling is very useful when you're in the presence of those who can't spell. Now, perhaps respectfully adopting a moratorium, this is a different example. Respectfully adopting a moratorium on a particularly painful or taboo subject with someone might be in order until the subject can be adequately approached. Some people in mourning may not want to hear words or well-intentioned speeches, particularly trite, overused recitations, but they may prefer simply to have a friend's silent company or a hug. Now, young children have difficulty grasping this mature concept of tact, as they tend to speak with complete and unabashed honesty about what they perceive. It can be very amusing, if not embarrassing. Kids just call it like they see it. Kids say the darndest things. And speaking of kids, this is another point here. Perhaps adults, watch your language. Perhaps adults shouldn't talk smack about each other or use vulgar language around children, lest they should add regrettable vocabulary to their extremely impressionable vernacular. Shouting in anger at anyone for the express purpose of winning by force, it doesn't make someone win. Everybody loses. It's wise to heed the old adage, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I know that I fail at this still, personally. Now, I've always had a rather black and white approach to truth in the past. And, I still do, but in the past, I've wanted to make sure that people knew the truth, especially if I knew that they were wrong or misinformed. Now, as a result, I have had social media arguments with people in which I firmly believed I was right, because I was. And the facts were all on my side, but it didn't mean that they were convinced. I spent way too long crafting well-thought-out, reasoned, logical arguments which covered every possible nuance and turned over every conceivable stone, only to be met with a lackluster, trolling response, which ignored the entirety of my efforts. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I have lost some social media friends because of what I've said to them, and that was even just privately. It wasn't even in public, like a public comment or anything like that. But anyway, I have learned that it's better to let some things alone. The Bible says, "Do not cast your pearls before swine, lest they turn on you and tear you apart." Now, the imagery there reminds me of something that my father has taught me likewise. He said that a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. I feel that I've been more successful at scrolling past someone's misinformed and rather emotional post, wishing that there was at least a facepalm button. But I, more often than not, have just been getting off of certain social media and just keeping off. Out of sight, out of mind. Now, the Apostle Paul exhorted the Christian church to keep good, lovely, pure, excellent, and praiseworthy things on our minds. This contrasts some of the junk that's available for consumption. So, in response, if we really don't want something in our culture, then we need to not feed it. This can be applied to all manner of self-expression. Imagine, theoretically, what media or consumer products would not exist if no one was going to purchase or subscribe to it. Just you can let your mind run on that one. Now, this idea of just because you can say something doesn't mean that you should, it also applies to other forms of media as well, not just speech. I think that the world would certainly be better off if certain unwholesome things were not made, filmed, or spoken. I once saw in passing some kids' cartoon on TV while I was waiting for someone, and I felt dumber for having seen it. I can't imagine that television show was beneficial to anyone who saw that broadcast. I also remember, for a college experience, having to sit through a comedian whose jokes were just not funny. He was not amusing at all. In fact, he was really pretty insulting. Now, John Cleese, from Monty Python, John Cleese says that comedy is always critical by nature. Yeah, it's true. But there's a difference, unless you're talking just like, practical, silly, goofy comedy. But even then, that kind of pokes fun at, clumsiness, if you will. But there's a difference between finding something to laugh about and just trying to get a shock reaction. And that comedian that we were forced to listen to was more undesirable than listening to Samantha Bee. Matt Walsh made a reaction video of, it wasn't try not to laugh, it was actually try to laugh, and he watched several different clips of Samantha Bee, and he said, I'm trying here, but there's like nothing here that's actually fun. Is this actually supposed to be funny? Yeah. It was kind of like that, but this guy I was listening to was actually worse than that, because he was really more insulting than actually just, trying to be funny. Other television shows like South Park or Family Guy also come to mind. Things that I really don't think have enough redeeming qualities to actually watch, just from the little bits that I've seen. There are other shows, movies, books, music, video games, symbols, etc., which also exemplify unethical, immoral, and degrading behavior. And I personally think that creating these things was regrettable. I understand that's an opinion, though. Now, in current events, the Confederate flag, the stars and bars, has continued to come under fire, especially recently. Some argue that it is simply a symbol of Southern culture, while others maintain that its historical context supersedes any innocent attachment it might have. I can understand that those who would argue against it would consider that the swastika, as an example, ubiquitously represents Nazi culture, racism, war, genocide, and so it is not an appropriate symbol to represent German culture, modern German culture. Besides, Germany has their own unique flag. I remember seeing a video where, I think in Japan, the swastika, not like the diagonal version it is, but like just more square, it means something, it has some innocent meaning in Japanese culture, just a little symbol, And then they were and in this video they were confronted by this idea that the swastika, like the diagonal version that we see on the Nazi flag, and what, how the Nazis used it, and so they started saying, yeah, I can understand how I might not want to, show that or use it, whatever, in front of certain people, because it has a historical context that is so pervasive, So this line of thought suggests that those who enjoy living in the southeastern United States, or those who just enjoy Southern culture, whatever that may be, whether it's the Bayou or New Orleans or jazz or I don't know, dueling banjos. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Appreciating southeastern United States culture, those who do that might want to select a new symbol to represent themselves. At least that's the idea that's being presented. Separate from the Confederacy. History must never be forgotten. But some history, I think, is meant to be a warning and a reminder to not let it happen again. So, yeah, anyway. And yet, I don't believe in politically correct, motivated censorship. Okay, that's where we get into problems. So, again, my point is, in this heading here is, you can say what you want to, but just because you can't say it doesn't mean you should. There's a difference between restraining yourself and being forced to recant something, or being forced to, by the PC crowd, to censor yourself. This is what the cancel culture has been doing to wreak havoc on innocent things like soot-covered chimney sweeps in Mary Poppins, or Aunt Jemima, maple syrup, or Elmer Fudd, or anything else which social justice warriors and Marxists have been crusading against. This is arguably one step short of Nazis burning books, since this is motivated by the PC police. You know, they say that Nazism is horrible, and yet they're censoring things like Nazis. I'm not saying they're killing people like Nazis, unless you consider rioters, but it's censorship is what we're talking about here. So, white celebrities apologizing for portraying a character of a different color, voice acting even, where you don't even see them, because of the, apologizing that because their white privilege granted them the ability to do that role. Or YouTubers quitting their accounts because some troll or group of trolls or somewhere cyberbullies are crying foul and likely feigning offense just to exert control. The renaming of buildings just because the person in question's unsavory aspects are, supposedly overshadowing any positive quality traits that they have. Conservative media outlets being blocked on social media and being wrongly labeled as hate speech. All of this kind of PC forced revocation of independent expression is wrong. I think Captain Picard, this is the same episode, the drumhead, Captain Picard said it best when he said, there are some words I've known since I was a schoolboy. With the first link, the chain is forged. The first speech censured. The first thought forbidden. The first freedom denied. Chains us all irrevocably. The first time a man's freedom is trodden on, we're all damaged. The American law guarantees that free thought and expression must be preserved, even if those thoughts were best not expressed aloud. Because remember, the personal pursuit of happiness, it doesn't mean actual achievement of happiness. It allows people to make mistakes and say things that they may regret. History must record these thoughts so that the lessons learned from them may prevent painful repetition. Now, having said that, I know I'm kind of walking a tricky line here. Finally articulating myself has taken time, and I may still have failed. There's a balance to observe here, and it's a struggle to wrestle with, I know, for some people. While I think it would be wise to exercise expressive restraint when prudent, I further think that there are some certain expressed things which are completely detrimental to society. I spoke about kids earlier. There's an abundance of unwholesome material which can easily fall into the hands of children. Kids should not be exposed to certain expressed things like gratuitous violence, promiscuity and extramarital fornication, or vulgar language and damaging behavior, reckless behavior. These are all harmful to a youth's mind. Well, any mind, really. Young children's mind are not designed to handle mature content, which is why at least we have a rating system. Remember when Doom was all over the news? Maybe this is before some of your time, but in the 90s, Doom was all over the news for being a controversially violent video game. Remember that? It was in the 90s. It was all over the news. There was even, I think it was even prompting governmental response from like senators or representatives or people like that for passing laws about it. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was going to be rated R, but Steven Spielberg managed to get a new rating created, PG-13, which is in between PG, which says, it's not the most friendly thing, parents, you might want to watch out a little bit, to rated R, which means no, kids aren't allowed here. So it was an in-between to say kids might be able to watch it, but not by themselves, because it might be scary, or it might have, an excess of action or violence or foul language or whatever. So it takes wisdom and honesty to know what ideas should be reserved for a consenting, appropriate audience and what doesn't deserve to be said at all. But again, freedom of choice must be allowed for those possessing personal sovereignty. Part of that freedom is understanding that people's desire and choice to express themselves by any means necessary may chain them in slavery to it. Because see, part of the constitutional American system is that it is predicated on having a moral and ethical society. America is designed for a moral and ethically minded people. In the time of America's founding, ethics and morals, whether it was directly from the pages of the Bible or not, that was the societal norm. It wasn't mandated, but it was the cultural patriotic moray, born in response to both the unbiblical Church of England's suppressing freedom to worship God freely and the reaction to the British government's taxation without representation, among other American grievances against the Crown of England at that time. Our system is based on ethics, and our system of freedom, based on ethics and morals, hinges on the practice of self-control. Everything that I've been saying about expressive restraint, whether it's humorous or serious, it all hinges on personal and collective maturity to either let well enough alone or to leave it unsaid. Not because you're forced to, but because it would be better to. Now, this leads into my final point. You are not free from the consequences of what you say. If you yell fire in a crowded room and incite panic, someone might get trampled to death, like it's Black Friday sales at Walmart, and that's on you. If you commit plagiarism, then you are liable to applicable punishments. Your reputation will be tarnished, and your integrity will afterward be called into question. If you're purposefully spewing false allegations against someone, you may destroy their professional life and as well as their personal life, or private life, even if they're acquitted. If you speak harshly against someone with hateful words in a bullying fashion, they will suffer and possibly not survive, depending on how evil you are, depending on their resilience or lack thereof? Do they have a thick skin, or, do they wear their heart on their sleeve? If you are a compulsive liar, or you spread rumors, then you will spin yourself into a web of lies that you won't be able to navigate. Anyone ever hear of the rumor weed? A tiny little story is all I need to make a big mess. Eventually, you will be caught if you continue to persist. If someone is routinely posting about controversial topics or political rants laced with expletives, they may get unfriended or even avoided in real life. If you badmouth your boss publicly and verbally deface the company you work for, you may find yourself looking for another job. I like using pop culture references if you haven't noticed. Do you remember Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan in You've Got Mail? Meg Ryan's character of Kathleen Kelly, not to be confused with Kathleen Kennedy, mind you, when confronted, so Kathleen Kelly is the character, when she's confronted by her business rival, who has a sharp wit and a sarcastic tongue, she can't summon a rebuttal to his fighting words. She is left speechless. She's just, I can't even do it. Just that little squeak, that hurt squeak that you can't even say anything. And she says that she's tossing and turning, trying to craft the perfect verbal response or riposte after the fact, when it doesn't matter. But Tom Hanks's character, Joe Fox, says, why don't I just send all my zingers to you so that I don't ever have to behave badly and you can behave badly all the time and we'd both be happy. However, I must warn you that when you finally have the opportunity to say what you mean to say at the moment you mean to say it, remorse inevitably follows. Proverbs 18:21 puts it this way: the tongue has the power of life and death. Quoting a reverend, her name is Marcia Martin, she had a commentary on this passage that she had posted on her church's website. She said, the stakes are high. Your words can either speak life or your words can speak death. Our tongues can build others up or they can tear them down. An unchecked fire doubles in size every minute. So, there is impetus to personal responsibility. Additionally, you can't control how people will react to what you say. These are unintended consequences. You may be taken out of context or deliberately misconstrued to others. Now, this does not mean that you should live in fear of what some troll may say, and you shouldn't censure, or meaning you should not condemn yourself unnecessarily. If you say something that actually is hurtful and offensive by all objective standards, then, of course, be kind enough to apologize. But the rash of virtue signaling going on nowadays is less about feeling remorse than it is being afraid of the PC mob, which have been militarized by Marxists and pleading guilty to crimes you haven't committed. It's domestic terrorism, really. People should be able to mutually respect each other's thoughts, and in the best case scenario. But as fair warning, life may not happen so amicably. Having said this, again, don't be afraid of what you think. Just be clear, respectful, and honest. That's a skill that should be taught in childhood, really. You mustn't feel obliged to take responsibility if, having done your best, people will still react badly to it or take issue with you. When you're dealing with the masses, you're going to have all kinds of reactions to say, I love you or I hate you. That's just the way it is. Now, likely, if they do take bad issue with it, if they take badly to it, it's often probably an issue with themselves. Social justice warriors are notorious for taking on causes and arguments that they have no business in order to make themselves feel good about themselves, having done nothing, next to nothing, to contribute to society as generations past have. They feel that their contribution to society is tearing it down and remaking it. But they aren't, willing to do the work of actually creating something. They just want to revise it or take it down. Now, if you've made it this far, then I know that there are some who will say to all of this or part of this, I don't care about what others think. I'm going to speak my mind whether they like it or not. And I understand and agree with that sentiment, that whether or not the world is perfect, embracing freedom means being allowed to express yourself how you see fit. And I hate political correctness. I don't like holding my tongue because adult, mature people with fully functioning mental faculties are responsible for their own choices. But there is something to be said about considering the ramifications of your expression. Graciousness is extending kindness beyond what's expected, and mercifulness is holding back what someone rightly deserves. So, in conclusion, let's put a little positivity here on this. Let's consider how to speak life. If you offer a word of encouragement, you might make someone's day. If you offer a note of thanks to someone, then it will validate their sacrifice of love for your sake. If you speak respectfully and graciously, then people will reciprocate, and they will respect you and think very highly of you. If you suppress the urge to indulge in rumors and drama, then your life may be considerably more peaceful. If you love someone enough to be honest with them when they don't want to hear the truth, it might hurt, but it will allow for healing. If not for them, at least for yourself. Speak the truth in love. Making people just feel happy, just be happy, it only lasts as long as that feeling persists. But consoling them falsely isn't really love, nor is stroking their ego. But real truth can lead to hope for something better, even in unhappy circumstances. So be humble. Allow for the opportunity to learn. If something must be said, say something uplifting, graciously. America celebrates our God-given freedom to express ourselves as we see fit. It's a power we have fought hard to protect, and only vigilance maintains it. It is a great power, and with great power comes great responsibility. So when the time comes to say something, what will you choose to say? As always, may the force be with you.